The evening air was cool and pleasant as Marcus Williams pulled his car into the parking lot of Giovanni's Italian restaurant. He had been looking forward to this dinner all week. After spending months away from home, all he wanted was a quiet meal and some time to himself. The restaurant looked warm and inviting with its soft golden lights glowing through the large windows. Marcus stepped out of his car and straightened his shirt. He was wearing simple civilian clothes, a blue button-down shirt and khaki pants. No uniform tonight. No rank insignia, no medals. Just a regular man wanting to enjoy a good meal. He had learned over the years that sometimes it was nice to blend in, to be just another customer in a restaurant. The host greeted him with a friendly smile as he entered. The smell of garlic, tomatoes, and fresh bread filled the air. Marcus felt his shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. The host led him to a quiet corner booth, exactly what he had requested when he made the reservation. The booth was perfect, tucked away from the main dining area but with a good view of the restaurant. Marcus thanked the host and settled into the comfortable leather seat. He placed his tablet on the table and ordered a glass of water. The restaurant was busy but not crowded. Families sat at large tables, their children coloring on paper menus. Couples shared bottles of wine at intimate tables for two. An elderly pair sat near the window, holding hands across the table. It was the kind of scene that made Marcus remember why he served his country, to protect peaceful moments like these. He picked up the menu and studied it carefully. Everything looked delicious. The waiter, a young man with a bright smile, came to take his order. Marcus chose the linguine with white clam sauce and a house salad. The waiter wrote down the order and promised it would be ready soon. While he waited, Marcus opened his tablet and began reviewing some documents. He had several meetings scheduled for next week at the base. There were reports to read and decisions to make. Even on his evening off, the work of a colonel never really stopped. But he did not mind. He loved what he did. Around him, the restaurant hummed with life. Forks clinked against plates. Wine glasses touched in quiet toasts. A baby laughed somewhere across the room. The soft music playing overhead mixed with the gentle sound of conversations. Marcus found himself smiling. This was nice. This was normal. This was home. At a table across the restaurant, two police officers sat finishing their dinner. One of them was Dale Hutchins. He had been a cop for 15 years and thought he knew everything about his job. Hutchins was a big man with a thick neck and arms that strained against his uniform sleeves. His face was red from the spicy pasta he had just eaten. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and leaned back in his chair. His partner, Officer Jake Morrison, was younger and quieter. Jake had only been on the force for 3 years. He mostly listened when Hutchins talked, which was often. Hutchins liked to tell stories about arrests he had made and criminals he had caught. Some of the stories were true. Some were exaggerated. Jake had learned not to question them. Hutchins was scanning the restaurant with his eyes the way cops often do even when they are off duty. His gaze moved from table to table, watching people eat and talk. Then his eyes stopped on Marcus. He stared for a long moment, his expression changing. His eyes narrowed. He leaned forward and tapped Jake on the arm. "You see that guy over there?" Hutchins said in a low voice, nodding toward Marcus's booth. "Corner booth. Blue shirt." Jake turned to look. He saw Marcus sitting peacefully looking at his tablet. "What about him? Does he look right to you?" Hutchins asked. His voice had an edge to it now. Jake looked again. He saw nothing unusual. Just a man waiting for his dinner. "Looks fine to me." "What are you talking about?" Hutchins shook his head. "Something's off. What's a guy like that doing in a place like this?" He continued to stare at Marcus, his jaw tight. Jake felt uncomfortable. He knew that tone in Hutchins's voice. He had heard it before and it usually meant trouble. "Dale, come on." "He's just having dinner." "Leave it alone," but Hutchins was not listening. His mind was already made up. He had a feeling and he trusted his feelings. That was what he always said, a good cop follows his gut. And his gut was telling him that something was not right about the man in the corner booth. Marcus remained unaware of the attention. He was reading an email from his commanding officer about an upcoming ceremony. He took a sip of water and glanced out the window at the parking lot. His car sat under a streetlight. He thought about the long drive he would take tomorrow to visit his mother. She lived 2 hours away and he had not seen her in 6 months. She would be so happy. She would make too much food and ask too many questions about when he was going to settle down and get married. The thought made him smile. The waiter brought his salad and Marcus thanked him. The greens were fresh and crisp. The dressing was tangy and perfect. He ate slowly, enjoying each bite. There was no rush tonight. No soldiers to command. No decisions to make. Just dinner. Across the restaurant, Hutchins stood up from his table. He adjusted his belt and checked his reflection in a nearby window. Jake looked up at him with concern. "Where are you going?" Jake asked. "Just going to check something out," Hutchins replied. His voice was firm, the voice he used when he had made up his mind about something. "Dale, we're off duty. Just enjoy your meal and let's go home." Hutchins ignored him. He started walking across the restaurant floor, weaving between tables. His hand moved to rest on his belt, near where his handcuffs hung. It was an unconscious gesture, something he did when he was about to confront someone. Other diners glanced up as he passed. There was something in his walk and his posture that drew attention. Marcus was cutting a tomato in his salad when he noticed a shadow fall across his table. He looked up and saw the police officer standing there. The man was large and imposing, blocking the light from overhead. Marcus set down his fork and looked at him calmly. For a moment, neither man spoke. The restaurant seemed to grow quieter, as if sensing that something was about to happen. Marcus could feel eyes turning toward his booth. He had been in enough difficult situations to recognize when trouble was coming. He took a slow breath and waited. Hutchins stood there, his chest puffed out, his face set in a hard expression. He was about to speak, and Marcus knew, even before the words came out, that his peaceful evening was over. Officer Hutchins stood beside the booth, looking down at Marcus with cold eyes. His presence was meant to intimidate. He had used this tactic hundreds of times before. Stand close. Use your size. Make them feel small. It usually worked. "Excuse me, sir," Hutchins said loudly. His voice carried across the restaurant. Several diners turned to look. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Marcus looked up at him calmly. He set down his fork slowly and wiped his mouth with his napkin. He had been through situations far more dangerous than this. He had faced enemy fire. He had made life-or-death decisions in combat zones. A police officer asking for ID was not going to rattle him. "Is there a problem, officer?" Marcus asked. His voice was even and respectful. There was no anger in it, no fear. Just a simple question. Hutchins shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Just routine, sir. We've had some reports about suspicious activity in the area, someone matching your description." Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. He glanced around the restaurant. Everyone was staring now. Forks had stopped moving. Conversations had died away. The only sound was the soft music still playing overhead. "Suspicious activity? I've been sitting here waiting for my dinner. What description are you talking about?" Hutchins's jaw tightened. He did not like being questioned. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Show me your ID." At his table across the room, Jake Morrison watched with growing concern. He knew this was wrong. He knew they had no legal reason to demand identification from a man sitting peacefully in a restaurant. But speaking up against Hutchins was hard. The older officer had friends in the department. He had seniority. Going against him could mean trouble for Jake's career. An older woman at a nearby table leaned toward her husband. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Why is that officer bothering that man?" Her husband shook his head. "I don't know, but something doesn't feel right about this." Marcus remained calm, but inside his heart was heavy. He had felt this feeling before. The feeling of being seen as a threat simply because of the color of his skin. It never got easier. Each time it happened, it was like a fresh wound. He had served his country with honor. He had led soldiers in battle. He had earned respect through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And yet here he was, being treated like a criminal in his own hometown. "Officer, I'm sitting here having dinner," Marcus said quietly. "I made a reservation. I ordered food. I'm not breaking any laws, so I'm asking you again, what is this really about?" Hutchins's face turned red. His hand moved to the handcuffs on his belt. "Are you refusing to cooperate with a police officer? Because that's a mistake, buddy. That's a big mistake." The restaurant manager, a thin man in his 50s named Tony, had been watching from behind the bar. He could see what was happening. His stomach twisted with anxiety. He did not want trouble in his restaurant, but he also did not want to see an innocent customer harassed. Tony walked quickly across the floor, trying to smile, trying to keep things peaceful. "Officers, gentlemen, is everything okay here?" Tony asked, his voice nervous. "Can I help with something?" Hutchins barely glanced at him. "Stay out of this. Police business." "But sir, this is my restaurant and this gentleman is my customer." "I said stay out of it," Hutchins snapped. His voice was sharp enough to make Tony take a step back. Marcus looked at the manager with understanding in his eyes. "It's okay," he told Tony gently. "I can handle this." A young woman 2 tables away had pulled out her phone. She held it low, trying to be discreet, but she was recording everything. Her friend next to her did the same. They had seen videos like this online before. They knew how important it was to document what was happening. "Officer, this is wrong," a voice called out. It was the elderly woman who had whispered to her husband moments before. She was standing now, her napkin still clutched in her hand. "This man has been sitting here quietly for 20 minutes. He hasn't done anything wrong. I've been watching." Hutchins turned his hard gaze on her. "Ma'am, sit down and mind your own business." "I will not," the woman said firmly. Her voice shook slightly, but she stood her ground. "This is not right, and everyone here knows it." Her husband stood up beside her. Then a man at another table stood. Then another. Within moments, half the restaurant was on their feet. They were not saying anything yet, but their message was clear. They were witnesses. They were watching. They would not pretend this was not happening. Hutchins looked around, suddenly aware that the situation was getting away from him. He had expected the man to simply show his ID and be done with it. He had not expected resistance. He had not expected an audience. His face grew redder. His breathing got heavier. "Last chance," Hutchins said to Marcus. "Show me your ID right now or I'm placing you under arrest for obstruction." Jake Morrison finally stood up from his table. He walked over slowly, his face troubled. "Dale, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Jake," Hutchins barked without looking at him. "I've got this under control." But nothing was under control. Phones were out everywhere now, recording from multiple angles. The manager was wringing his hands, wondering if he should call his owner. The elderly woman was still standing, her face set in determination. Other diners were murmuring, their voices rising in a low buzz of disapproval. Marcus felt tired. Bone tired, not from the confrontation itself, but from what it represented. How many times would this happen in his life? How many times would he have to prove he belonged? He thought about all the young soldiers he had commanded. Black soldiers, white soldiers, Hispanic soldiers, Asian soldiers. They had all worn the same uniform. They had all bled the same color. They had all been brothers and sisters in arms. Why couldn't civilian life be more like that? He thought about his mother, who had raised him alone after his father died. She had worked 2 jobs to send him to college. She had cried with pride the day he received his commission as an officer. What would she think if she could see him now? What would she feel knowing her son, her decorated son, was being harassed while trying to eat dinner? "Officer," Marcus said, his voice still calm but with a slight edge now. "I'm going to ask you one more time to explain the legal basis for this stop. What crime do you suspect me of committing? What specific, articulable facts do you have that would justify demanding my identification?" Hutchins's eyes widened slightly. Those were not the words of a common criminal. Those were the words of someone who knew the law. Someone educated. Someone who would not be easily intimidated. "Don't try to lawyer talk me," Hutchins said, but there was less confidence in his voice now. "I know my rights as an officer." "And I know my rights as a citizen," Marcus replied. The restaurant was completely silent now except for their voices. Even the kitchen had gone quiet. Cooks and dishwashers had come to the doorway to watch. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something important, something that would not be forgotten. Tony, the manager, tried one more time. "Please, officers, perhaps we could all just—" "I'm done asking nicely," Hutchins interrupted. His hand went to his handcuffs. He pulled them from his belt, the metal jingling in the quiet restaurant. "Stand up, sir. You're under arrest." The gasps were audible throughout the room. The elderly woman put her hand to her mouth. Her husband moved to stand protectively in front of her. Jake Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Several diners shouted protests. Marcus did not move. He looked at the handcuffs, then back up at Hutchins. His eyes were steady, calm, unafraid. "For what charge, officer?" "Obstruction, failure to comply, disorderly conduct. Take your pick." Hutchins reached for Marcus's arm. That was when Marcus made his decision. He would show his ID, not because he legally had to, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted this officer to understand exactly who he was dealing with. He wanted Hutchins to learn a lesson he would never forget. Marcus slowly reached into his back pocket. The entire restaurant held its breath. Marcus reached for his wallet with slow, deliberate movements. He had learned long ago to be careful with his hands around police officers. Any sudden movement could be misinterpreted. Any quick reach could be seen as a threat. It was a sad reality, but it was reality nonetheless. Hutchins watched his every move, his body tense, his hand hovering near his service weapon. The sight made several diners gasp quietly. Was this really happening? Was an officer really prepared to draw his weapon on an unarmed man in a restaurant? "Slow," Hutchins commanded. "Keep your hands where I can see them." "I am," Marcus replied calmly. His fingers found his wallet in his back pocket. He pulled it out slowly and placed it on the table in front of him. But he did not open it yet. He looked up at Hutchins with steady eyes. "Before I show you anything," Marcus said, "I want everyone here to understand what's happening. I want witnesses to what you're doing." Hutchins's face twisted with anger. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Marcus said simply. "I'm protecting myself. Because I've seen too many situations like this go wrong. I've seen too many men who look like me end up hurt or dead because of misunderstandings. So I'm being very clear, very calm, and very visible about everything I do." The elderly woman who had stood up earlier spoke again. "We're all watching, officer. We're all witnesses to this." Her voice was stronger now. Several other diners voiced their agreement. A man in a business suit near the front of the restaurant called out, "I'm a lawyer. And, sir," he directed this at Marcus, "you don't have to show him anything. You're not legally required to provide ID unless you're being detained for a specific crime." Hutchins whirled around to face the lawyer. "One more word from you and I'll arrest you for interference." The lawyer stood his ground. "Then arrest me, officer, because I'll make sure this incident is reported to every news station in the city. I'll make sure your department knows exactly what happened here tonight." Jake Morrison stepped closer to his partner. "Dale, this has gone far enough. Let's just walk away. We're off duty. This isn't our jurisdiction. We don't even have a real complaint. Stay out of this, Jake," Hutchins growled. But there was something different in his voice now. A hint of uncertainty. He could feel the situation slipping away from him. He had started this confrontation expecting quick compliance. He had expected Marcus to be intimidated, to show his ID immediately, maybe even to stutter and apologize. Instead, he had encountered calm resistance in a restaurant full of hostile witnesses. Marcus opened his wallet slowly. Inside were several cards, some cash, and a photograph of his mother. He looked at the photo for a brief moment, drawing strength from her image. Then his fingers moved past his driver's license. He was not going to show that, not yet. There was something else he wanted Hutchins to see first. "You know what the saddest part of this is?" Marcus said, more to the restaurant than to Hutchins. "I've spent the last 6 months overseas. I was in a place where people were actually trying to kill me. Real enemies, real threats. And I never felt as disrespected there as I feel right now in my own country." His words hit the restaurant like a physical force. Several people looked down at their plates, ashamed. Not ashamed of anything they had done, but ashamed that this was happening in their community, in their restaurant, in their America. A teenage girl at a table with her parents started crying softly. Her mother put an arm around her shoulders. "It's okay, sweetie," the mother whispered. But she did not sound like she believed it. "Nothing about this was okay." Hutchins shifted uncomfortably. "I don't care about your sob story. Just show me your ID." "My sob story?" Marcus repeated quietly. There was still no anger in his voice, but something harder had entered it, something that made even Hutchins take a small step back. "My sob story is that I serve a country that doesn't always want to see me as equal. My sob story is that I can wear a uniform and risk my life, but the moment I take it off, I'm just another black man who gets followed in stores, pulled over for no reason, and questioned while eating dinner." The young woman who had been recording spoke up. "This is going to be everywhere online, officer. Everyone is going to see what you did tonight. Everyone is going to know your name." Hutchins turned pale. In his anger and his certainty, he had forgotten about the phones. He had forgotten that in this age nothing stayed private. Every action was recorded. Every mistake was shared. His hand dropped away from his handcuffs. "I'm just doing my job," he said, but his voice had lost its authority. He sounded defensive now. Uncertain. No, the elderly woman said firmly. You're not doing your job. You're harassing an innocent man because of how he looks. We all see it. We all know what this is, her husband nodded. In my 65 years, I've seen a lot. I grew up in the South during segregation. I thought we had moved past this. I thought things had gotten better. He shook his head sadly. But I guess some things never change. Tony, the manager, found his courage. Officer, I'm going to have to ask you to leave my restaurant. You're disturbing my customers and creating a hostile environment. You can't kick out a police officer, Hutchins sputtered. I can and I am, Tony said, his voice shaking but determined. This is my business, and I won't have this happening here. Marcus watched this all unfold with a mixture of emotions. He was touched by the support of strangers. The elderly couple, the lawyer, the young people recording, even the nervous manager, they were all standing up for him. They were all choosing to do the right thing. It restored some of his faith in humanity, but he was also deeply saddened. Saddened that this was necessary. Saddened that strangers had to defend his right to eat dinner in peace. Saddened that in the 21st century this was still a conversation that needed to happen. I'll show you my ID, Marcus said finally. Not because you have any legal right to see it. Not because I'm intimidated by you. But because I want you to understand who you just disrespected. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a card. But it was not his driver's license. It was a different kind of identification, a military ID card, the kind that officers in the United States Army carry. The kind that shows rank and clearance level. The kind that marks someone as a leader, a defender, a protector of the nation. Marcus placed the card on the table, face up. The light from overhead caught the official seal. The words were clearly visible, United States Army. And below that, the rank that Marcus had earned through years of service and sacrifice, Colonel. The restaurant went completely silent. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone suddenly understands that they have witnessed something significant. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. Hutchins stared at the ID card. His eyes widened. His mouth opened slightly. All the color drained from his face. His hand, which had been so confident on his belt moments before, now hung uselessly at his side. Colonel, Marcus said quietly. Colonel Marcus Williams, United States Army, 22 years of service. 3 deployments to combat zones. Commander of over 500 soldiers. Recipient of the Bronze Star for valor in combat. He let each word sink in. He let Hutchins feel the weight of what he had done. Let him understand that he had not just harassed a random citizen. He had disrespected a decorated military officer. Someone who had risked everything for their country. Someone who had earned respect through blood and sacrifice. Jake Morrison closed his eyes and shook his head. He knew this was bad. This was really, really bad. This would not just be a viral video. This would be a scandal. This would be on the news. This would haunt the department for years. The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears. Thank you for your service, she said softly to Marcus. I'm so sorry this happened to you. Marcus nodded to her with gratitude, but he kept his eyes on Hutchins. He wanted the officer to see him. Really see him. Not as a threat, not as a suspect, but as a human being who had dedicated his life to protecting others. Do you understand now? Marcus asked. Do you see what you did? Hutchins opened his mouth, then closed it. No words came out. What could he say? What possible excuse could he offer? He had been caught, exposed, and everyone in the restaurant knew exactly what had happened and why. Hutchins reached out with a trembling hand to pick up the military ID card. His fingers were unsteady as he held it under the light, as if hoping he had somehow misread it. But the words were clear. The rank was undeniable. Colonel Marcus Williams stared back at him from the photo on the card, wearing his dress uniform with medals displayed proudly on his chest. This is, Hutchins stammered. His face had gone from red to white to an odd grayish color. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked like a man who had just realized he had made the biggest mistake of his career. Marcus sat quietly, his hands folded on the table. He let Hutchins struggle with the reality of what he had done. There was no satisfaction in watching the officer squirm, but there was a grim necessity to it. This was a teaching moment. A painful one, but necessary. You wanted to see my identification, Marcus said calmly. There it is. Now I have a question for you, officer. Would you have stopped me if I had been wearing my uniform? Would you have demanded my ID if you could see my rank on my shoulders? Or is it only when I look like a regular black man that I become suspicious to you? The questions hung in the air like accusations, because that was exactly what they were. Hutchins had no answer. Everyone in the restaurant knew the truth. They had all seen it play out in front of their eyes. Jake Morrison stepped forward, his face filled with shame. "Sir Colonel Williams, I apologize. This should never have happened. I should have stopped it sooner." Marcus looked at the younger officer with understanding. "You're right. You should have. Being a good officer means standing up against wrong actions, even when they come from your own partner." Jake nodded, accepting the criticism. He knew Marcus was right. He had failed tonight. He had stood by and watched injustice happen because he was afraid to speak up. That was almost as bad as committing the injustice himself. The lawyer who had spoken earlier approached the table. He pulled out a business card and handed it to Marcus. "Colonel, my name is David Chen. I specialize in civil rights cases. What happened here tonight was wrong on multiple levels. If you want to file a complaint or take legal action, I would be honored to represent you." Marcus took the card and looked at it. David Chen, attorney at law, civil rights and constitutional law. "Thank you," Marcus said. "I'll definitely be following up on this." The elderly woman came closer, her husband supporting her arm. Up close, Marcus could see she was crying. "Young man," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "I want to apologize on behalf of anyone who has ever made you feel less than the hero you are. My father served in World War II. He would be disgusted by what happened here tonight." "Thank you, ma'am," Marcus said gently. "Your support means more than you know." She patted his hand. "You keep serving with honor. Don't let ignorant people change who you are." More people began approaching. A young black couple came to Marcus's table, the woman holding their small son. "We're teaching our boy about heroes," the father said. "Men like you. Thank you for showing him what strength and dignity look like." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He reached out and shook the man's hand, then smiled at the little boy. The child smiled back shyly. For that child's future, Marcus thought, that's why this matters. So that boy wouldn't have to go through what he just went through. A veteran at a nearby table stood up. He was older, maybe in his 70s, wearing a cap that said Vietnam Veteran. He came to attention and gave Marcus a crisp salute. Marcus stood and returned the salute with equal precision. No words were exchanged, but none were needed. It was a moment of recognition between soldiers, between men who had served and understood sacrifice. Tony, the manager, was pale and shaking. "Colonel Williams, please, your entire meal is on the house tonight, and I want you to know you're always welcome here. Always. I'm so sorry this happened in my restaurant." "It's not your fault," Marcus assured him. "You stood up when it mattered. That takes courage." The young woman who had been recording approached next. "Colonel, I've already uploaded the video. It's on 3 different platforms. People need to see this. They need to know what really happens," Marcus nodded. Part of him wished this could be private, that his humiliation wouldn't be shared with the world. But he knew she was right. Silence protected nobody. Only truth and exposure could create change. Hutchins still stood there holding the ID card, looking like he wanted to disappear. His career was over. He knew it. Everyone knew it. This video would be everywhere by morning. The department would have no choice but to take action. His name would be infamous. I made a mistake," Hutchins finally said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Do you even understand what you're apologizing for? Do you understand that this wasn't just about me? This is about every black man who gets treated like a criminal for existing. Every Latino who gets asked where they're really from. Every person of color who has to work twice as hard to get half the respect." Hutchins looked down at his feet. He had no response. What could he say? Marcus was right, and they both knew it. "Your apology means nothing to me," Marcus continued. His voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. "Because I don't believe you're sorry for what you did. I believe you're sorry you got caught. I believe you're sorry there were cameras. I believe you're sorry I turned out to be someone who could fight back. But if I had been just a regular person with no rank, no status, no power, you would have arrested me. Maybe worse." The truth of those words settled over the restaurant like a heavy blanket. People shifted uncomfortably, because they knew Marcus was right. They had all seen the videos. They all knew how these situations could end. They knew about the names: Trayvon, Michael, Brianna, George. Too many names. Too many lives cut short. Jake Morrison took the ID card from Hutchins's hands and returned it to Marcus respectfully. "Sir, I'm going to make sure this is reported properly. I'm going to make sure there's a full investigation." "See that you do," Marcus said. He put his ID card back in his wallet, along with his driver's license that Hutchins had never actually needed to see. A man who had been sitting quietly in the corner stood up. He was wearing a nice suit and carrying a briefcase. "Excuse me, Colonel Williams? My name is Thomas Patterson. I'm a reporter for the local news station. Would you be willing to give an interview about what happened here tonight?" Marcus considered this. Part of him just wanted to go home, to put this night behind him. But he thought about that little boy he had just met. He thought about all the young people of color who needed to see someone stand up. Someone refuse to be intimidated. Someone demand respect. "Yes," Marcus said. "I'll give you an interview. Because people need to understand that this is still happening. In 2025 in America, this is still happening." Thomas Patterson nodded and pulled out his phone to take notes. "Can you tell me how this started?" Before Marcus could answer, Hutchins suddenly spoke up. "Wait, please. Before you do the interview, can I just say something?" Everyone turned to look at him. The restaurant went quiet again, waiting to hear what the disgraced officer would say. Hutchins took a deep breath. "I was wrong. Completely wrong. I saw a black man in a nice restaurant and I made assumptions. Terrible racist assumptions. I didn't see a customer. I didn't see a human being. I saw a stereotype, a threat, and that says everything about my failures, not about Colonel Williams." It was the first honest thing he had said all night. Marcus studied him carefully. Was this genuine? Or was this Hutchins trying to save what was left of his career? It was hard to tell. "You're right," Marcus said quietly. "That is exactly what you did. The question now is, what are you going to do about it?" Hutchins looked up, confusion in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you going to learn from this? Are you going to examine your biases? Are you going to work to be better? Or are you just going to be angry that you got caught?" It was a challenge, a direct one. Hutchins could either rise to meet it or prove that Marcus's worst assumptions about him were correct. The entire restaurant waited for his answer. This moment would define not just Hutchins's future, but perhaps set an example for others. Could people change? Could they recognize their prejudices and work to overcome them? Or was bias so deep that it couldn't be challenged? Hutchins looked around at all the faces watching him. He saw disappointment, anger, disgust. But in a few faces he saw something else. Hope. A chance at redemption. If he was willing to do the hard work. "I don't know," Hutchins admitted finally. "I don't know if I can change. But I want to try." It wasn't much. But it was something. A crack in the armor of certainty and prejudice. A small opening where change might be possible. The atmosphere in Giovanni's restaurant had completely changed. What had started as a peaceful evening had transformed into something far more significant. People were no longer just diners. They had become witnesses, participants in a moment that would ripple far beyond these walls. Tony, the manager, stood near the bar, his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking urgently to the restaurant owner, explaining what had happened. "Yes, sir. Yes, I know. But I had to do something. I couldn't just stand there and watch." He listened for a moment, then visibly relaxed. "Thank you, sir. I'm glad you understand." He hung up and approached Marcus again. "Colonel, my boss wants you to know that you have a standing reservation here anytime you want. No charge. Ever. It's the least we can do." Marcus appreciated the gesture, though part of him wondered if he would ever be able to eat here without remembering this night. Still, he thanked Tony sincerely. The manager had shown courage when it mattered. More police officers had begun arriving. Someone in the restaurant had called the police department to report what was happening. A sergeant named Rodriguez pushed through the front door, his eyes scanning the scene quickly. He spotted Hutchins immediately and his expression darkened. Hutchins, Morrison outside. "Now," Rodriguez ordered. His voice left no room for argument. Jake Morrison moved quickly toward the door. Hutchins followed more slowly, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But Rodriguez held up a hand to stop them before they left. He walked over to Marcus's table first. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Rodriguez. I'm these officers' supervisor." He looked genuinely pained, On behalf of the department, I want to apologize for what happened here tonight. This is not how we train our officers. This is not what we stand for. Marcus nodded slowly. Sergeant, I appreciate your words, but I've heard apologies before. What I need to see is action. Real consequences. Real change. You'll get it, Rodriguez promised. His jaw was set with determination. I give you my word. There will be a full investigation. This incident will be reviewed at the highest levels, and if you want to file an official complaint, I'll personally make sure it's handled properly. He handed Marcus his business card. Unlike David Chen's law office card, this one was official police department issue. Sergeant Rafael Rodriguez, Internal Affairs Division. Marcus tucked it into his wallet alongside the lawyer's card. Rodriguez turned to address the entire restaurant. I want to thank everyone here for staying and being witnesses. Your willingness to speak up, to record what happened, to stand against injustice. That's what good citizenship looks like. If any of you are willing to provide statements, please see me before you leave. Several hands went up immediately. The elderly couple. The lawyer. The young woman who had recorded everything. The Vietnam veteran. They were all willing to go on record about what they had seen. Rodriguez nodded with satisfaction, then turned back to Hutchins and Morrison. Outside. Now. His voice was like iron. The two officers practically ran for the door. Through the restaurant window, diners could see Rodriguez speaking intensely to Hutchins and Morrison on the sidewalk. Even from inside, his anger was visible. He pointed his finger at Hutchins, his body language making it clear that he was furious. Hutchins stood there taking it, his head bowed like a schoolboy being disciplined. Inside, the restaurant slowly began to return to some semblance of normalcy. People went back to their tables. Conversations resumed, though the topic at every table was what they had just witnessed. Children asked their parents questions. Adults tried to explain concepts like prejudice and justice in ways that made sense. Marcus's linguine finally arrived, brought by a different waiter this time. The young man who had taken his original order approached timidly. Colonel Williams, I'm so sorry about the delay. With everything that happened, he trailed off, unsure what to say. It's okay, Marcus assured him. Not your fault. The waiter hesitated, then spoke quietly. My brother is in the army. He's a sergeant. When he comes home on leave, he tells me stories about his commanding officers. The good ones and the bad ones. I think you must be one of the good ones, sir. Marcus felt touched by the simple statement. Thank you. That means a lot. As the waiter walked away, Marcus looked down at his pasta. It had gone cold during the confrontation. He picked up his fork anyway and took a bite. It didn't taste like much of anything. His appetite was gone. But he ate anyway, slowly and deliberately, because he refused to let Hutchins' actions ruin his entire evening. David Chen, the lawyer, approached one more time. Colonel, I mean what I said. This case would be important, not just for you, but for everyone who's been in your position. A civil rights lawsuit could force real policy changes in the department. Marcus considered this carefully. Can I ask you something? Why do you do this kind of work? Civil rights law can't pay as well as corporate law. David smiled slightly. My parents came to this country from Taiwan in the 1980s. They faced discrimination. They were told to go back to China, even though they weren't from China. They were told they were taking American jobs. They were treated like perpetual foreigners no matter how long they lived here. I became a lawyer because I wanted to fight for people who face that same injustice. People like my parents. People like you, Marcus understood. They were both fighting the same battle, just in different ways. I'll call you next week. We'll talk about what legal action makes sense. David nodded with satisfaction and returned to his table. The young couple with their son approached again. The little boy was holding something in his hand, a crayon drawing on the back of a kid's menu. He held it out shyly to Marcus. He wanted to give you this, the mother explained. He drew a picture of you. Marcus took the drawing carefully. It showed a stick figure in what was clearly meant to be a military uniform. The figure had a huge smile and was surrounded by hearts and stars. At the top, in a child's messy handwriting, were the words, "Thank you, hero." Marcus felt his eyes sting with unexpected tears. He blinked them back quickly. "This is wonderful," he told the boy. "I'm going to keep this forever. Is that okay?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "You're a hero like Captain America," he declared with the absolute certainty that only a child could have. "You know what? Marcus said, kneeling down to the boy's level. You can be a hero too. You don't need a uniform or superpowers. You just need to be kind to people and stand up for what's right. Can you do that? Yes, sir, the boy said, saluting sloppily. Marcus returned the salute with a smile. The parents thanked him again and took their son home, the boy chattering excitedly about the soldier he had met. The elderly woman and her husband stopped by Marcus's table one more time before leaving. The woman pulled out an old photograph from her purse. This was my father, she said, showing Marcus a black and white image of a young man in a World War II uniform. He fought at Normandy. He used to tell me that he fought so that all Americans could be free and equal. I'm sorry that promise hasn't been kept. Marcus looked at the photo with respect. Your father was a brave man. Thank you for sharing his story with me. No, she said firmly. Thank you for continuing the fight. In your own way, you're still serving our country. By standing up. By refusing to accept injustice. That's just as important as what you do in uniform. After they left, Marcus sat alone at his booth for a moment. The restaurant had mostly emptied out now. A few diners remained, finishing their meals in quiet conversation. The reporter, Thomas Patterson, was setting up a small camera in the corner, preparing for the interview Marcus had agreed to give. Marcus pulled out his phone and called his mother. She answered on the second ring. Marcus, baby, I was just thinking about you. Are you eating okay? Getting enough sleep? Just hearing her voice made him feel better. Hi, Mom, yeah, I'm eating. Actually, I'm at a restaurant right now. Oh, good. What are you having? Marcus looked down at his cold pasta. Italian food. Mom, something happened tonight. Something I need to tell you about. Her voice immediately shifted from cheerful to concerned. What happened? Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom, I'm safe, but... He paused, trying to find the right words. I was harassed by a police officer. For no reason. Just sitting here eating dinner. He heard her sharp intake of breath. Oh, Marcus, it's okay. I'm okay. I showed him my military ID and he backed down. And there were people here who stood up for me. Good people. It ended well, mostly. Mostly, she repeated. Baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Me too, Mom, me too. They talked for a few more minutes. She made him promise to call her tomorrow. She told him she loved him. She told him to stay safe. All the things mothers say when they worry about their sons. After he hung up, Marcus felt drained. The adrenaline from the confrontation had worn off, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. But he had promised an interview, and he would keep that promise. Thomas Patterson approached with his camera ready. Colonel Williams, I'm ready whenever you are. We can do this quickly if you prefer. Marcus nodded and straightened his shirt. Let's do it. The camera light turned red, indicating they were recording. Colonel Williams, can you tell me in your own words what happened here tonight? Marcus took a breath and began to speak. He told the story clearly and calmly. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't need to. The truth was powerful enough on its own. He talked about being approached without cause, about being threatened with arrest for doing nothing wrong, about the support from strangers that had restored his faith in humanity. What do you want people to understand from this? Thomas asked. Marcus thought carefully before answering. I want people to understand that this is still happening. In 2025, people of color are still being treated as suspects instead of citizens. I also want people to understand that change is possible, but only if good people speak up, only if witnesses refuse to stay silent, only if we hold systems accountable. What happens next? Next, I file complaints. I work with lawyers. I push for policy changes in the police department. And I keep serving my country, because despite everything, I still believe in what America can be. The interview lasted about 15 minutes. When it was over, Thomas thanked him and packed up his equipment. The night air was cool as Marcus finally left Giovanni's restaurant 3 hours after he had first arrived. His linguine had long since been replaced with a fresh, hot plate that he had eaten mechanically, tasting nothing. Tony, the manager, walked him to his car, apologizing one more time. Please come back, Colonel, Tony said earnestly. Don't let one bad officer keep you away from good food and good people. Marcus shook his hand. I'll think about it. Thank you for standing up tonight. As he drove home through the quiet streets, Marcus noticed his hands were shaking slightly on the steering wheel. The adrenaline crash was hitting him now that he was alone. He pulled into a parking lot and sat for a moment, letting the emotions wash over him. Anger, sadness, frustration, but also gratitude for the strangers who had become allies. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications. The video was already spreading online. Colonel Williams was trending. Comments poured in from across the country. Most were supportive, expressing outrage at what had happened and pride in how Marcus had handled it. But there were negative comments too. People questioning whether he had done something to provoke Hutchins. People suggesting he was playing the race card. People who would never understand because they had never lived it. Marcus turned off his phone and drove the rest of the way home in silence. The next morning, Marcus woke to sunlight streaming through his window and the sound of his doorbell ringing insistently. He pulled on a robe and stumbled to the door, still groggy from a restless night of sleep. Through the peephole, he saw news vans parked along his street. Several reporters stood on his lawn with cameras and microphones. His doorbell rang again. Marcus sighed. He had known this was coming, but seeing it was different. His private life was about to become very public. He ignored the doorbell and went to make coffee instead. His phone, which he had turned back on, showed over 200 missed calls and 500 text messages. Emails filled his inbox. Friend requests on social media had exploded. Everyone wanted a piece of his story. Among the messages, one stood out. It was from his commanding officer, General Patricia Morrison. "Marcus, I saw the video. Call me when you can. You did us proud last night. You represented the uniform well, even though you weren't wearing it." Marcus smiled slightly at that. He called the general back immediately. "Colonel Williams," she answered formally. Then her voice softened. "Marcus, how are you holding up?" "I'm okay, ma'am. Tired, but okay. I've already been in contact with the police chief. He's horrified by what happened. There's going to be a full investigation, and I've made it clear that the Army is watching closely." "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. Marcus, I'm also calling to let you know that you have the Army's full support in whatever action you choose to take. Legal, public, whatever you need. And if you need some time off to deal with this, it's yours." "Actually, ma'am, I think I need to work. I need normalcy. I need to focus on my duties. I understand. But the offer stands. And Marcus, you're going to get through this. You're one of the strongest officers I know." After hanging up with the general, Marcus spent the next hour returning calls. He spoke with David Chen, the lawyer, and agreed to move forward with a civil rights lawsuit. He spoke with Sergeant Rodriguez, who informed him that Hutchins had been placed on immediate administrative leave, pending investigation. He spoke with several news outlets, agreeing to interviews over the next few days. By noon, the story had gone national. Major news networks were covering it. Political commentators were debating it. Social media was ablaze with discussions about police reform and racial profiling. Marcus's face was everywhere. The doorbell rang again. This time, when Marcus looked through the peephole, he saw someone he recognized. His neighbor, Mr. Patterson, an elderly black man who had lived on the street for 40 years. Marcus opened the door. "I saw what happened on the news," Mr. Patterson said. "I wanted to check on you, and I wanted to tell you something." "Come in, please," Marcus said, stepping aside. Mr. Patterson entered slowly, leaning on his cane. Marcus offered him coffee and they sat in the living room. "When I was your age," Mr. Patterson began, "I was pulled over by police 17 times in 1 year. 17 times. Never got a ticket. Because I wasn't speeding or breaking any laws. They just didn't like seeing a black man driving a nice car through their neighborhoods." Marcus listened quietly, recognizing the pain in the older man's voice. "I never fought back," Mr. Patterson continued. "I was too scared. Back then, fighting back could get you killed. Or worse, your family could get hurt. So I stayed quiet. I took the abuse. I swallowed my pride over and over again." He looked at Marcus with tears in his eyes. "But you didn't stay quiet. You stood up. You demanded respect, and you survived it. You know what that means to old folks like me? It means things are changing. Slowly, maybe, but changing." "I hope you're right," Marcus said softly. "I am right. Because of young people like you who refuse to accept injustice, who document it, who fight it. You're doing the work we couldn't do." After Mr. Patterson left, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts. The weight of what had happened was beginning to sink in fully. This wasn't just about him anymore. He had become a symbol, a representative of everyone who had faced similar injustices. That was a heavy burden to carry. Over the next week, Marcus's life became a whirlwind of activity. He gave interviews to newspapers, television stations, and radio shows. He met with civil rights organizations. He spoke at a community forum about police reform. He worked with David Chen on the lawsuit, providing detailed statements and documentation. The police department's investigation moved quickly, pushed along by public pressure and media attention. Security footage from the restaurant confirmed everything the witnesses had said. The recordings from multiple phones showed Hutchins's aggressive behavior and baseless accusations. There was no way to deny what had happened. 2 weeks after the incident, the police department held a press conference. The chief stood at a podium, looking uncomfortable but determined. After a thorough investigation, we have concluded that Officer Dale Hutchins violated department policy and engaged in racial profiling. He has been terminated from the force effective immediately. Officer Jake Morrison, who failed to intervene, has been suspended without pay for 30 days and will undergo additional training. The chief paused, looking directly at the cameras. We have also implemented new policies requiring all officers to complete enhanced bias training. We are reviewing our procedures for handling complaints of discrimination, and we are establishing a civilian oversight board to review incidents of alleged police misconduct. It was more than Marcus had expected. Real concrete changes. Not just apologies, but action. The chief continued. I want to apologize directly to Colonel Marcus Williams. What happened to him should never have happened. We have failed in our duty to serve and protect all members of our community equally. We will do better. Marcus watched the press conference from his office on base. Several of his fellow officers watched with him, offering support and solidarity. When it ended, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since that night in the restaurant. Hope. But the real test came 3 weeks later when Marcus decided to return to Giovanni's restaurant. He had been avoiding it, unsure if he could handle the memories. But Tony had called him personally, asking him to come back. We're doing something special, Tony had said mysteriously. Please come. 7 o'clock next Friday. When Marcus arrived at the restaurant that Friday evening, he was shocked by what he saw. A banner hung over the entrance. We stand with Colonel Williams. We stand against injustice. Inside, the restaurant was packed. But these weren't random diners. These were the people who had been there that night. The elderly couple. The lawyer. The young woman who had recorded everything. The Vietnam veteran. The family with the little boy. They had all come back, invited by Tony to honor Marcus. As Marcus entered, everyone stood and applauded. The little boy ran up to him and hugged his legs. The elderly woman had tears streaming down her face. Even strong men wiped at their eyes. Tony approached with a huge smile. Colonel, we wanted to show you that Giovanni's is your home. We wanted you to know that we remember what happened here, and we're committed to making sure it never happens again. We've trained all our staff on how to handle situations like this. We've put up signs saying that discrimination of any kind will not be tolerated, and we've established a scholarship in your name for military families. Marcus was overwhelmed. He had to blink back tears of his own. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep coming back, Tony replied. Say you'll let us be part of your community like you're part of ours. Marcus looked around at all the faces watching him with love and support. These were strangers who had become friends. People who had stood up when it mattered. People who had chosen to be on the right side of history. I'll keep coming back, Marcus promised. The dinner that night was filled with laughter and stories. People shared their own experiences with discrimination and how they had overcome them. They talked about what still needed to change in their community. They made plans to attend city council meetings together and push for continued police reform. The little boy, whose name was Tyler, sat next to Marcus and asked a million questions about being in the army. When I grow up, I want to be just like you, Tyler announced proudly. Marcus smiled at him. Then you need to study hard, treat people with respect, and always stand up for what's right. Can you do that? Yes, sir, Tyler said, saluting again. As the evening wound down, Marcus stood to address the group. I want to thank all of you, he began. That night 3 weeks ago was one of the hardest of my life. Not because of what Hutchins did to me, I've faced worse in combat, but because it reminded me of how far we still have to go as a society. He paused, looking at each person. But you all reminded me of how far we've come. You reminded me that there are good people who will stand up against injustice. You reminded me that change is possible when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things. You didn't have to get involved that night. You could have looked away, but you didn't, and that made all the difference. The elderly woman raised her glass. To Colonel Williams, she toasted, and to all of us who refused to stay silent. To refusing to stay silent, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Marcus drove home that night with a full heart. Yes, the incident had been terrible. Yes, it had exposed ugly truths about society, but it had also revealed something beautiful, the capacity of ordinary people to stand together against wrong. The lawsuit against the police department would take months to resolve. The changes in policy would take time to implement. The work of fighting discrimination would never truly be finished. But Marcus felt ready for it all. He thought about his mother, who had called him every single day since the incident to make sure he was okay. He thought about the general who had backed him without hesitation. He thought about his fellow soldiers who had sent messages of support from all over the world. He thought about the strangers in the restaurant who had become allies, and he thought about Tyler, the little boy who wanted to be a hero. Marcus had a responsibility to that child, to all the children who were watching and learning. He had a responsibility to keep fighting, keep serving, keep standing up for what was right. As he pulled into his driveway, Marcus saw Mr. Patterson sitting on his own porch next door, waving. Marcus waved back. Two black men, separated by decades but connected by shared experience. One who had survived by staying quiet, one who had survived by speaking up, both deserving of respect and dignity. Marcus went inside and sat down at his desk. He pulled out his laptop and began typing. He was writing a letter to Tyler, one that he would give to the boy's parents to save for when he was older. In it, Marcus wrote about courage, dignity, and the importance of standing up for justice. He wrote about the battles worth fighting and the sacrifices worth making. He ended the letter with these words: "Dear Tyler, by the time you read this, you'll be old enough to understand what happened that night in the restaurant. I hope you'll live in a world where such things never happen. But if you don't, if you face injustice, remember that you have the power to fight it. Remember that you are never alone. Remember that change happens when good people refuse to accept wrong. Be that person, Tyler. Be the change you want to see, and know that I'm proud of you, even though we've only just met. Because I see in you the future, a better, more just future. Keep believing in it. Keep fighting for it. Keep being a hero." Marcus sealed the letter in an envelope and addressed it to Tyler. Tomorrow he would mail it. Tonight he would rest. He had served his country in combat zones, and he had served it in a restaurant confrontation. Both required courage. Both mattered. As he lay in bed, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: peace. The journey ahead would be difficult, but he was ready. He was a soldier, after all, and soldiers don't give up. They adapt. They overcome. They serve. Marcus closed his eyes and slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow he would wake up and continue the fight. Not with weapons, but with words. Not with force, but with dignity. Not with hatred, but with hope. And that, he knew, was the most powerful weapon of all. As Marcus entered, everyone stood and applauded. The little boy ran up to him and hugged his legs. The elderly woman had tears streaming down her face. Even strong men wiped at their eyes. Tony approached with a huge smile. "Colonel, we wanted to show you that Giovanni's is your home. We wanted you to know that we remember what happened here, and we're committed to making sure it never happens again. We've trained all our staff on how to handle situations like this. We've put up signs saying that discrimination of any kind will not be tolerated, and we've established a scholarship in your name for military families." Marcus was overwhelmed. He had to blink back tears of his own. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep coming back," Tony replied. "Say you'll let us be part of your community like you're part of ours." Marcus looked around at all the faces watching him with love and support. These were strangers who had become friends. People who had stood up when it mattered. People who had chosen to be on the right side of history. "I'll keep coming back," Marcus promised. The dinner that night was filled with laughter and stories. People shared their own experiences with discrimination and how they had overcome them. They talked about what still needed to change in their community. They made plans to attend city council meetings together and push for continued police reform. The little boy, whose name was Tyler, sat next to Marcus and asked a million questions about being in the army. "When I grow up, I want to be just like you," Tyler announced proudly. Marcus smiled at him. Then you need to study hard, treat people with respect, and always stand up for what's right. Can you do that? Yes, sir, Tyler said, saluting again. As the evening wound down, Marcus stood to address the group. I want to thank all of you, he began. That night 3 weeks ago was one of the hardest of my life. Not because of what Hutchins did to me, I've faced worse in combat, but because it reminded me of how far we still have to go as a society. He paused, looking at each person. But you all reminded me of how far we've come. You reminded me that there are good people who will stand up against injustice. You reminded me that change is possible when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things. You didn't have to get involved that night. You could have looked away, but you didn't, and that made all the difference. The elderly woman raised her glass. To Colonel Williams, she toasted. And to all of us who refused to stay silent. To refusing to stay silent, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Marcus drove home that night with a full heart. Yes, the incident had been terrible. Yes, it had exposed ugly truths about society. But it had also revealed something beautiful. The capacity of ordinary people to stand together against wrong. The lawsuit against the police department would take months to resolve. The changes in policy would take time to implement. The work of fighting discrimination would never truly be finished. But Marcus felt ready for it all. He thought about his mother, who had called him every single day since the incident to make sure he was okay. He thought about the general who had backed him without hesitation. He thought about his fellow soldiers who had sent messages of support from all over the world. He thought about the strangers in the restaurant who had become allies, and he thought about Tyler, the little boy who wanted to be a hero. Marcus had a responsibility to that child, to all the children who were watching and learning. He had a responsibility to keep fighting, keep serving, keep standing up for what was right. As he pulled into his driveway, Marcus saw Mr. Patterson sitting on his own porch next door, waving. Marcus waved back. 2 black men, separated by decades but connected by shared experience. One who had survived by staying quiet, one who had survived by speaking up, both deserving of respect and dignity. Marcus went inside and sat down at his desk. He pulled out his laptop and began typing. He was writing a letter to Tyler, one that he would give to the boy's parents to save for when he was older. In it, Marcus wrote about courage, dignity, and the importance of standing up for justice. He wrote about the battles worth fighting and the sacrifices worth making. He ended the letter with these words. Dear Tyler, by the time you read this, you'll be old enough to understand what happened that night in the restaurant. I hope you'll live in a world where such things never happen. But if you don't, if you face injustice, remember that you have the power to fight it. Remember that you are never alone. Remember that change happens when good people refuse to accept wrong. Be that person, Tyler. Be the change you want to see, and know that I'm proud of you, even though we've only just met. Because I see in you the future, a better, more just future. Keep believing in it. Keep fighting for it. Keep being a hero. Marcus sealed the letter in an envelope and addressed it to Tyler. Tomorrow he would mail it. Tonight he would rest. He had served his country in combat zones and he had served it in a restaurant confrontation. Both required courage. Both mattered. As he lay in bed, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. The journey ahead would be difficult, but he was ready. He was a soldier after all, and soldiers don't give up. They adapt. They overcome. They serve. Marcus closed his eyes and slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow he would wake up and continue the fight. Not with weapons, but with words. Not with force, but with dignity. Not with hatred, but with hope. And that, he knew, was the most powerful weapon of all.